All right, welcome back to this is somehow the fourth episode, but the first episode that has a name, and the name is now Database School. So I've been doing these interviews with so far SQLite people and putting them on YouTube, and thought this would people would probably listen to this as a podcast. So I take the audio now and strip it out. Now it's a podcast, so you can find this on YouTube, or I don't know if I have a Database School domain, but look for it on YouTube. You'll find it there. So today, I have the great pleasure of being here with Kent C. Dodds, who probably needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. Kent C. Dodds is the guy on the internet that I kind of look up to, if I'm being honest. He's a prolific creator. He's all around positive, good guy, and he's creating Epic Web, the Epic Stack. He's just like the king of the React world. So that's as effusive as I can be. Kent, do you want to don't rebut anything because it's all true, but do you want to add anything?
Well, geez, that you're making me blush. That's very nice, Aaron. I also look up to you a lot, and the way that you interact with people online, and your depth of experience in the database world, and also on the Laravel side of web development. The web world is a very large place and has room for all of us, and I appreciate the varied perspectives that we have in web. So, I also have 5 children. And you might hear them in the background here. But I live in Utah, and I have been doing web development. Well, I graduated from Brigham Young University in 2014, so it's been a decade since I graduated now. And pretty much just JavaScript since then. So that is, and I do lots of stuff with React. I started with Backbone, and then got into Angular, and then React, and now I build full stack, depending on your definition. According to Taylor, I do full stack development with Linux.
I think we settled, or he settled on that being full stack, and then the other, what was the other differentiator? I don't remember, but we settled that like it runs on the server, it's full stack. Backing up a little bit, I forgot you have 5 kids. Y'all just had a new one, right?
We did, yeah.
Well, congratulations.
November, so he's 7 months now, and just like totally wonderful, adorable kid. Then my oldest is 11. So
wow.
We've got, we're getting close to the teenage years, which is kind of going to be, I can already tell that my daughter is changing, not just like anatomically, but also like in attitude and just like personality and everything. So cautiously optimistic about the direction.
Yeah, well, I guess if she's 11, I'm 8 years behind you. My oldest are 3. So I'll be coming to you when mine start to enter that preteen phase with hopefully not too frazzled and frenzied, hopefully just some advice. But congrats on the 5th one. That's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, most of the cheers go for my wife, that's for sure.
I know, yes. I know that to be true. So tell her I said that as well. So the reason you're on here at Database School is I read a blog post of yours. I don't remember when you wrote it, but I read it recently, talking about migrating from a Postgres cluster to SQLite with LightFS. And I thought it would be interesting because you, I think like me, are or would consider yourself more of an application developer than like a DBA. You might call yourself a framework author or something, but I think you and I both live on like more of the application side. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk to you about, from more of a user of a database perspective, kind of the journey that you went through and what your experience has been so far, having moved off of this Postgres cluster.
Yeah, for sure. Very accurate to describe me as an application developer. I'm if I am a DBA, it's reluctantly. It's the infra side of things is never, and ops has just never really gotten me very excited. And I appreciate that there are other people in the world who are excited by that. Especially Ben Johnson, who created Lightstream and LightFS. You've had him on already. Really, really awesome guy. Love that guy. He makes my life a lot easier. And so, yeah, pretty much the name of the game for me is how do I make my application infrastructure and like the tools that I'm using, as simple like as possible while still enabling the user experience that I'm targeting. And so like I started building my app. Well, I guess I'll back up a little bit. When I built my website, and actually like rebuilt it in 2021, it was motivated out of a desire to learn how to do things in the modern age. So I worked at PayPal for a long time and saw, okay, here's how you build at scale for millions of users all over the world. And then I left PayPal to go full-time on my teaching. So I am a full-time teacher. Testingjavascript.com was my first thing that got me into full-time teaching. And then Epic React was something I released in 2020. And so in 2021, I said, okay, it's been like 2 years since I left PayPal. I need to get back into like building something real so that I can then teach people how I did it. And so that was the guiding light for my website, was like, I don't want to just build a developer portfolio, because I'm not just teaching people how to build dev portfolios. I want to teach people how to build web applications that are like dynamic and global and really powerful, all that. And so there was an important aspect of what I was building was that this scales very well and that it's global. In fact, not a lot of people were talking about pushing things to the edge back then. There were definitely people talking about that, but most people were on US East and whatever, and that's fine. And even still, lots of people are still there, and that's fine. But I wanted to be on the edge because I felt like that was where a lot of things were going to go, and like where the next level of performance can be achieved and all of that. And so that actually led a lot of my decisions. I started out using Firebase for my data and auth and stuff, and then I realized, oh, if I do that, now I can't be, like, I technically can deploy my app anywhere, but now every request has to go talk to wherever Firebase is, and that is just not great. And so then I started looking at doing some sort of distributed data thing, and I found Fly.io did Postgres clusters, and they made it like really easy. Not just Postgres, but also Redis with read replicas all over the world. And I was like, that's perfect. I'm going to go with that. So I did, and I launched my website with multi-regional deploys. I think I chose like 6 regions, deployed my application and Postgres and Redis clusters to all of those regions. And my app was like super duper fast, and it was awesome. I found a couple of problems with that though. So first of all, like I had no business doing any of this. Like doing like managing services, and honestly, Fly
makes it so easy.
Yeah, Fly makes it pretty easy, so it wasn't actually too bad. But if there was ever a problem of any kind, and like these were pretty early days for Fly too, and so if Fly had a problem, I had like no idea how to give them enough information for them to help me. And so occasionally Postgres or Redis would fall over. I would have no idea what to do. And the Fly folks were super awesome and responsive and stuff. So like there were times that I was like, I think I'm going to jump off a Fly and do something a little easier or whatever. But no, they were super great, and I'm super happy to be with them. But another thing that bothered me was the complexity of running things locally. It's not really complex. We've got great tools, and I had Docker Compose and everything. It wasn't a huge deal, but like it was annoying, especially since my website is open source. If somebody wants to contribute, even like text changes, just to run the app so they can see their text changes, it's a whole thing. And so I didn't want to have that friction. I would get multiple. I'm looking at the post here, so people looking at the post are like, he's just reading the post. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. But I would get multiple people send me like screenshots of my 500 page because it's a little humorous. Yeah. Just like this grimacing GIF of me, just because like there was Postgres went down or Redis went down or something. And so I kind of got bothered by this a little bit. Well, quite a bit. Yeah. Like your website shouldn't be, especially the thing that you're publishing free stuff on and whatever. I don't want to babysit that. Like I'm happier babysitting the stuff that people give me money for. Like that's great. I'll babysit that all day. But for the stuff I throw out there for free, no, I don't want to deal with that. I want to like just have it and go. And there are really great ways to do that. Like you can use off-the-shelf tools and stuff. There's lots of other hosts that have really easy things that you can use, but they can't provide the user experience that I was targeting with multi-region data replication and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so talk to me real quick about that. What is that user experience that kept you like slogging through this journey? Like what is the thing you're after?
Yeah, so the thing there were a couple of things that were requirements for me. First of all, I wanted a dynamic front end, so I didn't want to have full page reloads on every navigation and things. I wanted to have and so like, you know, there are a lot of tools that can do that. I could even use Create React App for that, whatever. But I also wanted it to be server rendered as well, so that I can have the like no jank when the page loads. I don't want to have a bunch of unnecessary UI states as the UI is loading. So they land on the page, it is exactly what it looks like, and it doesn't change at all, unless there's like an animation, which I do have like a fade-in animation for some stuff, and that's great. That's a good user experience, but nothing like text bouncing around or whatever. You can't always help with fonts loading and stuff. That's stupid, but you do the best that you can with that. And then the other part of this was the way that I like to build applications as well, because it's not just here's the user experience I want to offer, but here's also the way that I like to build applications and the way I want to teach people to build applications. And so like I could do some of that with like just a WordPress site, but I wanted to build my website in the way that I build full-fledged web applications. And so yeah, it's got to be React. Remix was brand new on the scene, and I was very encouraged by what I saw there already, and so I decided to use Remix. But yeah, the primary user experience I was looking for was rendered on a server, dynamic, not just from like an interactive thing on the browser, but also dynamic to the user. And so that actually is kind of interesting. So you can log into my website, you can make your own account and everything. And you actually, when you log in, you choose a team and whatever one of 3 teams. And when you read a blog post, you score points for your team. And whichever team has read the most relative to how many members they have owns the blog post. And all the links are in your team's color and stuff. So that's
fun. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's just kind of a fun thing. So
what are the team names?
So they don't have names. They're just colors. It's yellow, red, and blue. Kind of like a Pokemon Go thing a little bit. But yeah, so this blog post right now is owned by the yellow team. So all the links are yellow, which is kind of fun. And so like by doing this, and not only that, we also, because I'm keeping track of your blog posts that you're reading, I can give recommendations based on the one that you're looking at, the ones that you've read already. I'm not going to recommend those, all that stuff. And so what that means is that on almost every page, I'm recommending other blog posts at the bottom. And I don't want any jank or anything like that. So those also need to be server rendered. And so what that means is I can't use HTTP caching on a CDN for my pages, because every one of them is going to be different for every user. And it's, in fact, it's even different and kind of randomized every time you load the page. So if you scroll down to the bottom and hit refresh over and over again, you're going to see that those blog posts are changing every time. And as a result, like the performance characteristics actually are kind of interesting there too, because I can't use the platform caching. I need to do this dynamic on the server. And so that was part of what led me to saying, okay, I want to distribute this globally. And it's not just like, let's distribute it globally, but also like at PayPal, we have many instances of our apps running over there. And so you need to have your app capable of running multiple instances, which is fine. But when you decide, okay, I'm going to distribute this globally so that it's fast, whether you're in India or Amsterdam or Chicago, that is where the data stuff gets a little bit more complicated, because now you're like, oh, I need to make sure that my database is close to my instances of my app. Otherwise, my app is going back and forth between my database, and what should take 100 milliseconds to load is now taking 1,000 milliseconds to load. which is not the user experience I was targeting. So, so there were some interesting constraints that I put on myself. I like to tell people it's not over-engineered when referring to my blog or my site. It's not over-engineered, it's over-scoped, which is,
okay.
I can accept that. So
I like that. Okay, so you're in this situation where you've got your website deployed all over the place with Fly, which is awesome. Fly makes it super easy. If you're not familiar with Fly, it's like they run their own cloud, so it's an insane thing to do. But they're doing it, and I feel like they're doing well these days. So they put servers, makes it easy for you to put your application on the edge. But then, like you said, you got to phone home to the database if you have a centralized database. So what's the point? You haven't gained anything. So to solve that, you're trying to run Postgres, which Postgres is great, but it is more complicated. I mean, I don't think that's not debatable. It is more complicated. And so you're hitting a few snags with maybe early Fly platform plus complicated client-server database. And so instead of giving up on that, you changed tack. Is there anything missing there?
That's pretty much it. I mean, I could go into more detail on some of the other things that the application does, but as far as the database is, and actually there's one thing that I'll tell you about later when we talk about SQLite. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, as far as the data is concerned, those are the constraints that I had on. So any database that I chose needed to have replication as a first-class citizen. I needed to be able to have my database right next to wherever the instance of my app was running.
And I think until this conversation, I had forgotten or was under the impression that your blog you were basically shipping static content out to the edge. But this whole like keeping track of who has read what, all of that, you're doing writes back to the database. It's not just like you're shipping off a sealed set of data.
Yeah, correct. And so there are mutations going on. And of course we have user accounts and stuff. I guess I'll mention also that the blog post content itself is all hosted on GitHub and MDX files. And my application, it's not a static build either. So my application makes API calls to GitHub to get those and then compiles them on demand on the fly.
Okay.
And so when and this is actually another requirement that's sort of interesting, was my previous blog was built with Gatsby. And so even like a typo change had to rebuild the whole site. It took like 20 minutes. It was stupid. And so that was another thing I wanted to make sure I didn't run into here was I want to be able to make a typo change and have it reflected on the site in seconds. And so that's the case now. When I've got a GitHub action that will say, oh, you changed this MDX file, I'll go tell the application, and it goes and refreshes that content.
Cool. So is it such that your application is listening or has an endpoint where GitHub can fire and say like invalidate that one and fetch it again?
Yep, exactly.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I built a whole caching system around all of that, which is it's pretty neat. It's now a library. A lot of people are using it. It's built into the Epic stack. It's called Cachified on NPM, and it's very helpful. And so I just hit that endpoint, and it doesn't blow away the cache. It just says, okay, let me go revalidate that value, and then I'll update the cache. So users are never waiting because all of this stuff is done dynamically on demand and stuff. If I blew away the entire cache, then it would take a couple minutes to rebuild everything because it is a lot. I've got over 200 blog posts or I think right at 200 blog posts on there, which have a lot of like interesting dynamic things in them as well. Like I have my own Twitter embed. It's not actually embedding Twitter. I hit the Twitter or the X API to get that information, all that stuff. But so it can be a little bit much, but when it's in the cache, it takes all of like 10 milliseconds to get everything together for the HTML document. And in fact, if anybody is interested in the timings of all that, I also have a server timing header on the response for my blog post. So you can take a look at like, here are all the things that were done and here's how fast they all happened. It's kind of interesting.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this. Just as a reminder, you can learn more about SQLite at highperformancesqlite.com. I'll get out of your way. Back to the interview. Oh man, that is super cool. It sounds like this is one of your long running playgrounds. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I go hard on that too. It's not just the content. I also have 2 podcasts from 2 different podcast hosts that are on there. You have one of my podcasts is called the Call Kent podcast, where you can record a question in the browser. It will save that audio to my database, and then I record a response, and then I use FFmpeg to stitch them all together to turn it into a podcast episode.
Of course you do.
So,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that sounds like fun. I want to do that. I want to have a Call Aaron podcast.
Yeah,
that sounds like a lot of fun.
I'm actually right now. I'm in that phase where I just finished launching some educational stuff, and I'm back into okay, let's build some stuff and practice and whatever. And I'm going to productize that eventually. I'm productizing another thing that I built, but yeah, eventually that's one thing I'll productize, and I'll let you know when it's ready.
Yeah, please do. I have seen rumblings on Twitter of you being like, "Hey, what should I charge for out here?" And I'm like, "Yes, Kent, I want you to build some sort of product." Like, as an educator myself, I enjoy education, and I think it's a lot of fun. But I'm excited to see what product you build. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've got cool ideas.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I look forward to seeing them. So. Okay, so we have our heads around the scope of this. It sounds reductive to call it a blog, but the scope of this application, we'll say. And so at some point you reach a breaking point with Postgres, and you're like, I gotta simplify. Is that kind of what it is?
That's pretty much how it went down. So what happened was, it's very difficult for me to justify spending time on my free stuff, as I talked about already. But I was also working on, the reason I built the site was, okay, let's get some practice so that I can teach people how I did it. And so, it is important there. So anyway, I finished building it. I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about teaching people how to do this. But the database thing I was not super thrilled about. And also, teaching people how to build full stack apps, if it also requires Postgres and Redis, is just an extra bit of friction that I wanted to avoid. At least up front. Eventually, if this is the way to do it, then I'm going to teach you the way to do it. I'm not going to take shortcuts just to make my life easier. But to get things started, I built a new app called Rocket Rental, which was like an Airbnb for rocket ships. It had to be
Love it.
real world enough that it was something you could learn from, but not so real world that people would think it's a real product. And so I thought, okay, you're renting rocket ships from your neighbors. But I was planning on using Postgres eventually, but I started with SQLite. And I thought, you know what? This SQLite is pretty dang nice. Very, very nice. I like this very much. The local development is very easy. And I've got a persistent volume on Fly that's really easy. And then I discovered Lightstream and LightFS. And that was when I was like, oh, wait, so my hard requirements on a distributed database can actually be satisfied with SQLite. That's when things got really interesting to me. And I connected with Kurt, the CEO of Fly. He and I had been in conversations a lot. And I joined Remix actually for a little while before I started building Rocket Rental. And so, we were in communication a fair bit. And then he introduced me to Ben Johnson, who was the creator of Lightstream. Started talking with Ben about, okay, so how do you use LightFS? And got into that.
So your setup now, you stayed on Fly because of the servers being close, and I like the ease of deployment there. And then you started to poke around with SQLite, and you're like, hang on, this is awesome. So describe for the edification of the listener, the Lightstream, LightFS, just kind of at a high level, what the difference is, which one or ones you are using, and how you're finding the experience.
Yeah, so I never used Lightstream, and I don't know. I don't think that LightFS is built on top of Lightstream. I think it's based on many of the same principles. Folks who don't know or haven't listened to Ben's episode should go back and listen to that. But high level, Ben built Lightstream so that SQLite could have a better disaster recovery experience, and so you just back things up to an S3 bucket and things. It's really nice. LightFS had I'm not sure if the primary goal of LightFS was read replicas. The thing that they productized out of it was LightFS Cloud, that is also a disaster recovery sort of thing. It's automatic backups built into Fly. As a thing that fell out of that, whether that was the original intent or not, was read replicas and the ability to have a primary where all the writes go to, and then the read replicas all over the world. And so that's what I'm using is LightFS. I also have LightFS Cloud as for my backups, and I've never actually had to restore from one of those. Because I definitely have had to restore, but when I needed to restore was before LightFS Cloud. So I'm like, hey Ben, do you think you can restore my database for me?
Perks of knowing a guy.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of fun. But just as a high level, what LightFS is, imagine you've got your application and then you've got the file system. I'm using my hands. People listening won't be able to see this. But so the application is writing to the file system. It's saying, hey, SQLite, do this thing. SQLite's writing to the file system. So what LightFS does is it tricks SQLite into thinking that it's writing to a file system, but it actually isn't writing to a file system. And then LightFS replays those transactions into an actual database under the hood. And so because it's playing the middleman, it can go and replay those same transactions on the read replicas. Which is actually very similar, as far as I understand, to what Postgres is doing. Not so far as the file system is concerned, but you've got this ability with Postgres to say, hey, go replay those transactions over there. And so architecturally, from what I was already doing, is very similar. And SQLite is not so dissimilar from Postgres. I think the biggest change I had to make was I had enums for my roles, and I had to change those to just strings, which is, it's whatever. I actually, in retrospect, I regret using enums in the first place, and so. Well,
that was a happy little coincidence there.
Yeah, exactly. That worked out really well. And what's really cool about SQLite, I didn't consider this when I was migrating, but what I realized was, let me back up. So on the blog post page, I show you this your read rankings of all the different teams. But the way that I calculate that is kind of interesting because I want to make sure that it's fair. So I'm not just saying the number of people from each team and that's your score. It's like how many people relative to how many people are on the team and how many of those people are active. And so I have to know, and they're active if they've read a blog post in the last year or something like that. And so I have to do a lot of calculations. And maybe if I were interested in spending a lot of time in SQL, I could do this in a single query, but I'm not. So I do this. I think it takes 9 queries to do all of the get all of the data that I need, and then I do a lot of calculations. And so as a result, I was like, okay, I'm going to just cache all of this stuff. And it was really easy because I had my cache with Redis and everything. Now I'm using SQLite instead of Redis as well. So I have 2 databases, one for the cache. But what is interesting is I could probably remove the cache now because queries with SQLite are just so insanely fast.
It's crazy, right?
It's nuts. And so I could probably remove that cache, but that was one thing that I was very excited to find is when you don't have latency, it's not just that these 2 boxes are in the same data center, and so they're really, really fast. No, they're literally on the same machine. So there's no network latency at all. It's outrageous how fast these queries were. So I was very
one of the weird advantages of SQLite is you don't have to worry about n+1 anymore. And in my bones, I'm like, well, I still want to kind of worry about it. It feels better to do it right. But yeah, when your latency is microseconds instead of milliseconds, it's I'm gonna spend my time doing something else.
Aaron, that's exactly the right attitude to have. And sometimes I forget to have that attitude, but it's not just oh, this doesn't matter. Oh, it does still matter. If you have a lot of queries that could be a problem. But what SQLite enables for the n+1 problem is that it matters or it impacts you less, and so you can focus on other things that matter more. And so it's just one less thing that matters as much as the other things. So I was very excited about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so Lightstream, not in use on your blog, is Lightstream is primarily single point disaster recovery. So you have SQLite on a machine, and it's streaming out to S3 the changes, and nobody else is listening, just S3. LightFS, you've got one writer, and it's like sending out these changes to potentially a bunch of different listeners who are the readers.
Sorry to interrupt, Aaron. One thing I'll add to that also is I was able to get rid of the Postgres service and the Redis service, and so now I just have one web server, but I do still have the console service, which is and that's all managed by Fly. I barely even know it's there, but I do know it's there if things get out of sync, but that hasn't happened in a long time. I think they've really matured that, but yeah, it is another service that like is the primary election thing. So I have my primary database is where all the writes need to come into. So if someone wants to change their username or whatever, that's got to come to the primary region. And so I put that in the region that is most central to most of my users. And then I actually put 2 instances. We can talk about this more, but I put 2 instances in that region, which we can talk about later. And then, and so when my app is deploying, the instance in that region just lets everybody know, hey, I'm the primary, and console like sends that out to everybody. So there is still another kind of service hanging out in the background, but that's managed by Fly. Okay,
that's super interesting. How is the you'll have to forgive me because I don't know too much about console. I know what it does, but that's about it. So how do you, as like the person orchestrating this, how do you declare what's primary? Like, because you want it in a region of your choosing, so you can't just leave it up to the system to say elect somebody else. So how do you constrain it to, let's say, DFW or whatever you've chosen?
Yeah. It's a great question. So this is configured in the LightFS configuration.
Got it. Okay.
And so you have this LightFS YAML file, and it's got a bunch of options, but one of them is the lease type. And so you can just say static lease every time it's going to be in DFW or whatever. And the benefit to that is it's really easy, really simple. But the drawback is that if that region falls over, then you have no more primary. There's nobody else can take over. Yeah, exactly. So not great.
Bad news. Yeah.
And so like one of the primary benefit I was going after by doing multi-instance was for performance. But another benefit to that is for failover. And so if one of the instances goes bad, then the others can handle it and it's fine.
And so are you saying let's say you run 1 in Sydney, 1 in Japan, 1 in California, and then 2 in DFW?
Yeah.
Assuming DFW is your primary?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool.
And there are 2 reasons that I do that. So one is if one of those regions falls over, then the other can take primary. And actually, before I say that, I should also mention you don't have to specify which region is your primary. You could just say like whatever, any instance can be primary, it's fine. And that would probably be fine for lots of applications. People typically are okay with their writes taking a little bit longer than their reads. That's like a pretty normal thing to hit save and wait a second, like it's whatever. But yeah, it's important enough to me. So I do say my in the LightFS config, you have the lease, and then you can say the type is console, candidate is Boolean of true or false, but you can put an expression in there. And so I say if the Fly region is equal to the primary region, these are environment variables, then it can be a candidate for being a primary. So so there are 2 reasons.
LightFS handles that. It just happens to work super well with Fly, but that's part of the LightFS configuration.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, cool. Carry on.
So there are 2 reasons to have 2 instances. One is if one falls over, then the other can take over. But then the other is during deploys. The unique thing about let's talk about doing deploys of regular applications that aren't using LightFS and SQLite. We're just connecting to a Postgres or MySQL or whatever. You can spin up a new instance of your app, and you've got the one that's already handling the traffic. And then you say, okay, don't handle traffic anymore and send it over to this one because now this is, and they're both connected to that database at the same time and it's fine.
Yep.
The problem is with SQLite is you have your volume that has a SQLite database, and that volume can only be attached to one VM at a time. And so during the deploy process, this one's coming up, but it can't actually come up until that volume has been moved over and attached to this new VM. And so what that means is during that process, like, okay, so we're going to detach this volume from the old one, we're going to attach it to the new one, and then we're going to start the new one. Like, we can't even start it until the volume's been attached. And so there's like seconds, depending on how fast that your deploy happens, but yeah, several seconds where your application's just not responsive to users. And some applications, that's fine. Like, that's not a big deal for some. But for the types of UX that I'm going for, it's not. And so that is why I have two regions, so that they kind of do it one region or one instance at a time. Sorry, but that's why I have two instances. Is they'll take that primary, and that's still handling traffic. Then they'll take that secondary and drop that one. Then they'll bring up the new version, and then they can transfer the volume over to that. And the old primary or the when the primary drops, then it can transfer over to the other instance while this new primary shows up. And so, like, the blue-green deploy works a lot better when you have those multiple instances and can just switch traffic over, switch the volume over.
So let me see if I got it. You've got a bunch of regions, but one region is your primary. So in your primary region, you have two instances. We'll say primary A, primary B. And you're deploying a new version of the app. And so you need primary A v2 and primary B v2. So you've got these two primaries, or these two instances in the primary region where one of them is actually the primary SQLite writer. And so what you're saying is you can't have no downtime if you just had one primary, because that volume has to switch, which causes downtime.
Yes.
And so what I'm understanding you saying is you tell, or someone tells LightFS that, hey, let's send all writes to primary B. And then primary A is going to go through the V2 upgrade. And then do you switch all the writes to primary A v2, and then you bring primary B up to v2?
Yeah, that's pretty close. So the primary A, which is the actual primary v1, that's going to stay primary. Primary B is going to fall over, and we get a new primary B. This is the v2 now. And so then this one says, hey, I can be the primary now. And so then primary switches over here, and now primary A v1 can drop, and we get a new primary A v2. But primary B is now the actual primary.
And next time it'll switch. And so it kind of hops back and forth between A and B depending on the deploys.
And you know what's super cool is it took me like forever to figure out that's how it worked, and it didn't matter that I didn't understand it. It just worked.
Oh, that's great. So I guess the high level is you put two instances in one region and then tell LightFS either of these can be primary, and then you're off. You don't have to worry about it.
Yep, exactly.
That's great. Awesome. I love that. That's cool. That's super cool. Very smart and very, very easy if you're not writing LightFS, which neither of us are. So we get to just benefit from it, which is great.
Yeah. There were a lot of interesting challenges that I came across as I was using LightFS, which had like this very clear warning. In fact, I started using it before they decided to add the warning, but they had a warning for a long time, not production ready. And so you're
like, I don't care, baby.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, this is the future. I can tell this is going to be awesome. So I'm going to bet heavy, and I'm going to go through a lot of pain to go through this. But it ended up being working out pretty well. But I can tell you a couple of the interesting challenges that I faced that LightFS is handling now. So first of all, like the data migration was interesting. I did have enums and stuff, and I'm not smart enough to do like the wide and the narrow. Well, no, I am smart enough. I know how to do that. The wide and narrow migrations and zero downtime. I know how to do that, and that's actually documented how to do that in the Epic stack and stuff. But I didn't care enough. That was what it really was. And so I wrote this little script locally to like read all of the data from the Postgres database and save it in a SQL file, and then I FTP, SFTP that up to my box, and that's how I did the data migration, which was kind of interesting.
Love it.
And most of the app code didn't need to really be changed because I use ORM, I use Prisma.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of things that were kind of interesting that I ran into that were a problem for LightFS is consider this scenario, and this actually was the case with Postgres as well. But because Postgres is a bit slower, you never really ran into this problem. But here's the scenario. So I'm in Amsterdam, and I want to update my name on your website. And so I say, hey, I'm going to go update my name. What happens is that request comes into the Amsterdam, the AMS region, my instance, and that instance is like, oh, hey, hold on a second. I can't handle writes. So I'm going to send a response that has this special header called fly replay. And Fly is going to see that header on that response and be like, oh, you don't actually want to send that to the user. You want to send it to this instance that you want to replay to. So I say fly replay DFW. Cool. And so Fly is like, okay, I'll throw away that. And I'm going to take that same request that was sent before and send it to DFW instead. And that
so that response never makes it out. It gets caught by Fly and says, hang on, send it to DFW and we'll redo it.
Yes, exactly.
So cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. Yeah, it's super awesome. And that actually can, it's a little bit tricky how to make all of that work because like I don't want to do checks everywhere in my code to say, are you going to write? Then let's do this.
Sure.
But anyway, that in some ways becomes a little bit of an application code problem sometimes. But anyway, what the problem arises is that, okay, so now we're replaying that request to DFW. The write happens, and then the response goes back to the user. And so that write now is propagating to all the regions. But let's say that the response gets back to the user, and the user makes a request for updated data before that propagation happens. It typically will happen in 200 milliseconds or less. But like this could be very fast, like this that response to the user from DFW back to AMS and then AMS back to its region close by. That can happen. I saw it happen. And so you end up with stale data because you're reading an old replica data that hasn't replicated yet. And this,
so you're saying if the user in AMS sends a write to DFW and then hits a endpoint that's read only, they're going to read from the local AMS copy, and that write may still be propagating from DFW to AMS at sub speed of light, and so they may get some stale data if they refresh pretty quickly. Okay.
Yep, exactly. And the further you are away from the primary instance, the more likely this is to happen. Give or take. Depends on how fast your internet connection is. But yeah, so this is, and how close you are to the region that you're at. But yeah, this definitely happens. And at scale, even edge cases become common. And so this is something that you want to really think about.
Did you come up with that? I love that. At scale, edge cases become common?
Yeah.
Is that you?
I think I came up with that specific phrase, but this is something that my brother, my brother works at Microsoft. He's a director on the Azure team. He's in charge of all memory on Azure, which is kind of interesting.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
But yeah, he said, yeah, Kent, at scale, something, and I turned it into that phrase. So yeah.
Well, sorry to Brother Dodds. That's Kent's phrase now.
Yeah,
that's a good phrase, and we give all credit to Kent.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to have this problem. And so I developed a little library that would set a cookie when a write response was sent. And so it sets SQLite or LightFS keeps a transaction record. This is something that it already did. There was a file that was the transaction number or some identifier for that transaction. And that just auto increments over time. And so I could say, okay, here's your transaction ID. It had like some hash of something and then also the number. So anyway, I'd say, here's your transaction ID. Then when the request from AMS going to that region went out, AMS would say, do I have that transaction? Am I that far along? Yeah. And if it's not, then it just makes the user wait until that replication happens, and then it sends, it lets the request go through.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're not even doing like sticky sessions. So you're not forcing that AMS user to reconnect to DFW for some arbitrary period of time, which would be a best guess. What you're doing is you've solved it absolutely by saying, all right, here's your high watermark, and until AMS user sees this high watermark in AMS server, just hang on a second because I swear it's going to be there. That's kind of your strategy. I love that.
Exactly.
That's great. I am familiar with sticky sessions. This is not something. This is not something I had considered. I like that.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things I want to say about that. First of all, this is you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, you don't want to do distributed databases because like that's so complex. There's so many things like that can go wrong." I'm pretty confident this is the thing that most of them are talking about. And I just figured that out, and like that was it. I don't know. So when they say that, I'm like, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
But the other,
you're like, what am I missing? Because it's not that hard.
Yeah, exactly. I'm probably still missing something, if you're being honest. But the other thing I wanted to call out about that is I'd never heard of sticky sessions until you just said that. And when you say that, I know exactly what you mean, and that makes total sense to do it that way. But this is just like an interesting thing about the world is that if I had known about sticky sessions, I probably would have just done that. But I like my solution better. And
I do too.
I wouldn't have even come up with it if I had already known. And so, like, the curse of knowledge is a real thing. And I think that it's useful to get new perspectives on problems. I'm not a database person. This is not a problem that I'm faced with very often. That's probably why I didn't really know about sticky sessions. But I think that it's okay for people to try things that they have no business doing, because maybe you'll come up with something that's pretty awesome.
Yes. And to keep it on theme, even the creator of SQLite said, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to write my own database. Like I didn't know you weren't allowed to do that, and so I did it. And it feels like the exact same thing. Like I'll sometimes get questions on videos of like, why did you make a video about this? And I thought it was cool. Like I thought it was cool, and I thought this is really fun. I'm gonna do it, and I really really like that vibe. Like, hey, I'm gonna try and see what happens, and maybe it'll work.
Yep. That is also why just yesterday I started implementing my own background job service.
I saw that. Yeah. I saw that. You want to talk batteries included framework? You're doing background jobs? Okay. This is awesome. I love it.
I'm not going to give anything away, but I am. It's going to be amazing, and I'm actually not even going to have to build the whole thing myself at all, which is why it's.
I saw like three or four of the heavy hitters come out and be like, "Hey, I can help you." It's like the Redwood guy, the Ingest guy, somebody else. We're like, "Oh, well, I'll help you." It's like this is awesome.
Yeah. It's going to be pretty sweet. But yeah, so one other thing I wanted to mention is that, so I put this together in a library for LightFS that has, on NPM, that has like information about, am I on the primary region? And if I'm not, what is the primary region and or instance? And also like the utilities for setting the cookies and waiting and all that stuff. I put that in a little library. But I talked with Ben a lot about that, and they put it on the fly, the Superfly GitHub org, so you can go find it. And the Epic Stack actually does use this because it can be useful to know whether you're in the primary or not. But the cookie, the eventual consistency problem was such a good solution that Ben built that into LightFS. And so now, he actually mentioned this in your episode with him, but there's a proxy server that handles that for you. So it handles setting the cookie and waiting on the request. And it just does this in kind of a simple, dumb way where like GET requests are just going to go straight through, and those are going to wait on the cookie. But anything other than a GET request is going to set the cookie, and it's going to... And also it handles replaying the request to the primary as well. Most application developers don't need to worry about this or think about it at all. The only time that you'll run into a problem is if you need to do a mutation on a GET request, which definitely does happen. You typically don't want to do that, but like examples of when you would is if you want to keep track of user activity, like this user is still doing stuff. Or even more common is let's go and revalidate this cached value. So this user requested it, it's stale, we'll send it back and we'll revalidate it in the background. And so there are still situations where you do need to think about this in your application code. I've packaged up the caching stuff in the Epic Stack, and I'm going to actually turn that into a library soon. But for the most part, this is probably the leakiest part of this LightFS abstraction, and it's duct taped pretty well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And just to put a fine point on it, it sounds like the non-database guy that pretends he's a reluctant DBA, i.e. you, told Ben this strategy, and he was like, "This is awesome. I'm going to build it straight in." So I don't know. You might be a database guy.
Oh, no.
I know. Welcome. Join us.
Really careful what you get good at.
You do. You wander down a dark alley, and suddenly you're a DBA. So you got to look out, man. So how does this inform? We've talked about the Epic Stack a little bit. How does this inform some of the decisions you're making? Because would you say you're building a framework? Is that what you would say the Epic Stack is? Like, is that the name you would give it?
Yeah. I would. So in the front end world, like the framework and library are kind of mixed. Like a lot of people say React is a framework, and other people will get mad at you if you do that. But then, like Next.js and Remix and Redwood, they're all built on top of React. So are they the frameworks, or are they?
But what's a meta framework? Who knows what a meta framework is?
Yeah.
Okay, so all right. Verbiage aside, you're building Epic Stack. How does all of this experience inform some of the decisions you're putting, like you're baking into the Epic Stack?
Yeah, so the Epic Stack it's not quite, or it's certainly not close to the level of a Laravel or a Rails, where like things are all built in. It's all a cohesive package. The Epic Stack is very much JavaScript sort of thing, where it's cobbled together dependencies and stuff. And
we'll call it bespoke. I'll give you bespoke. Yeah.
Bespoke is good. I think that like culturally, the JavaScript ecosystem actually thrives on that. At least the React side of things. Like there's Angular and Ember. They were all like, batteries included type framework, where React was like, you bring your own batteries. And I think we probably won't ever get away from that in the front end ecosystem. We just like putting these pieces together. So that's what the Epic Stack is right now. I do want to do like swallow up more things. I don't want to build an ORM. Prisma is a great ORM. Sure. But like for the things that aren't put together nicely, I'm going to just do it myself. And so yeah, over time, more and more things in the Epic Stack will become libraries, like the caching stuff that I was talking about. But yeah, for right now, the Epic Stack is a project generator and reference for people. And and pretty much everything that I built up to this point with my personal website, all of the good parts are going into the Epic, or have gone into the Epic Stack. And then some. So it has like caching, it has all the testing stuff you would expect. It has and it comes with tests already around the authentication stuff, two-factor authentication, third-party authentication, which is like a hop, skip, and a jump to SSO. And there are examples of all of that stuff too, as well as like your components and different things, all of that, themable and stuff like that. So, using LightFS pre-configured, you have a CLI that you can get something into production in just a few seconds onto fly. And eventually I will have like a deploy with fly button that like you connect your GitHub, you connect your fly, and it will get an app up and running for you. Yeah, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you have a good vision for it. And I like one of the things, I talked to DHH about his usage of SQLite and kind of in the Rails ecosystem. And one of the things that stuck with me from what he was saying was he wants to lower the entry point as much as possible for people, in his case, getting into Rails. And so he looked at it and thought, like, you know what could be a blocker? Getting a freaking Postgres container or instance up and running. And I don't want people to not pick up programming or Rails, was his words, because they got stuck on Postgres. There's a lot of things to get stuck on, and if we can remove any of them, well, that's all the better for the users. And that reminded me when you said that your website is open source and you want people to be able to pull it down and play with it, just removing that blocker goes a pretty long way. And it sounds like you're trying to take that into the Epic stack, where not only play with it locally, but get it all the way deployed to like a pretty good production setup with as few blockers as possible.
Yeah, I really appreciated when DHH said that, because I think that is just so useful to think about the beginners. And when we think about the beginners, the experts also benefit as well, because it's easier for us. Another thing that the Epic stack has is mocking third-party dependencies locally, so that we have a third-party dependency for sending emails and like other things like that. So if you do GitHub authentication stuff, all of that is mocked locally. And so, yeah, reducing the barriers to that development experience, it really helps everybody. And so especially, you and I as educators care a lot about the newcomer experience. And so, that matters a lot.
Well, I am just so thrilled that you took the time to come on here and explain all of this. This is I feel so much when I'm talking to Ben Johnson, I'm like, oh man, I'm way over my head. But as application developers, as educators, I feel like, okay, we can jam on some stuff here. So thank you so much for coming on here and doing this. Where can people find you, and is there anything else you want to cover before we call it a day? Yeah,
so the thing I work on is Epic Web. You can find that at epicweb.dev. And if the Epic Web is actually kind of like the premium docs for the Epic stack. The first series of workshops that I've released on there is basically, let's build the Epic stack. And so you get a really, really deep understanding of authentication and database and optimization for that database. And there's even a free tutorial on there for deploying to multiple regions all over the world with SQLite. So take a look at that too. Then you can check out my website too, kentcdodds.com. Let me know if it doesn't load fast for you.
And where can people find you on Twitter/X?
Yeah, I'm Kent C. Dodds everywhere.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again for doing this. It's been a delight, and thank you for everything you're doing for the state of education on the web.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I definitely appreciate all that you're doing as well.
All right. We'll talk soon. See ya.
Bye.